Hey everyone, it's Ardith. Thanks for stopping by. Today is my second post as the October guest for Neat Tangled, and I made a fun North Pole scene. My card uses a number of sets including Oh Dear, Santa's Wonderland, Berry Mary, Into the Woods, and Get Yeti. I don't usually plan out my cards, but I knew this scene was complex and it would include a lot of masking, so I thought it would be better to create a guide before I started stamping for real. For my plan, I used a scrap piece of paper cut to 4 3/4 by 6 3/4 inches. To fit all the deer I wanted in my scene, I knew this card had to be 5 by 7. I grabbed all the stamps I wanted to use and simply stamped them onto the paper, no masking at all at this point. I just wanted to get a sense of spacing and see where everything would be. The next job was a big one, and that was cutting out all the masks. Man, those antlers were tricky, but I soon figured out that I didn't need to have them cut out in detail. I used my guide, and one by one I laid all my masks onto my scene, right over top of the images underneath. This gave me a better sense of which images were in front of others, and it gave me a place to keep them. I don't know if I'm the only one, but I always seem to be losing things right on my desk. After all this prep work, it was finally time to start stamping for real. I used Lawn Fawn jet black ink, and I stamped my images in order, placing the mask down after I stamped each one. I did pretty well following my guide with the deer, and Santa, and the North Pole sign. And then I think I got a bit cocky. When it came to the snowman, I stamped him quite a bit higher than I had on my guide. I didn't realize it at this point. I stamped the log cabin in the same place with reference to the snowman, and then I moved on to the mountains. Once the whole scene was masked, I cut some 2-inch wide post-it tape with curves to use as landscape masks on my snowy ground. I used Catherine Pooler polished stone ink and a sponge dauber to give some definition to snowdrifts all over the scene. Then I used Catherine Pooler It's a Boy ink and a dauber to fill in the sky. This took a minute or two, and really I could have used a bigger blender to do it, but I was a little concerned about lifting any of the mask edges. It looked a bit blotchy while it was still wet, but once it was dry, it all smoothed out. Now comes the best part of the whole process, removing all the masks. Up until now, even with the best laid plans, it's hard to see how it's all going to come together, but it really did. This is when I noticed that the snowman was placed a little high, which meant that the log cabin in the mountains was really in the mountains. Next is a huge amount of Copic coloring. I'm not leaving it all in, and I'm speeding it up so that you don't fall asleep. Although I love my Copics and I've been using them for years, I'm no expert, and I mostly just use 3 shades of each color to try and create a bit of dimension in my coloring. When I'm coloring a busy scene like this, I also try to limit the number of colors I'm using, just to add some unity across all the images and keep things simple for me as well. After all the coloring, I had 2 little extra steps to add some fun details and finishing touches. First, I used a Uniball Signo white gel pen on the deer's spots and to create highlights on their noses. Next, I grabbed my trusty Stardust stickles and I added some sparkle to the mountaintops, Santa's fur trim, and the North Pole sign. I've been using Stardust stickles since I started crafting. They're easy to use and they don't create a mess, and they have such a pretty sparkle. The only drawback is that they do take a bit of time to dry. Finally, it was time to stamp the sentiment. As you can see, the sentiment I had planned to use was not going to fit where it did on the guide. So I changed my plan and I used a smaller sentiment from the same set. Before it was completely finished, I did go back and add another layer of snowdrift under that log cabin. That gave it some ground, and it looks less like it was floating up in the mountains. To finish the card, I used foam tape and simply popped up the panel on a white card base, and that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Shopping links are below and on my blog. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.